Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Aspiring Speakers Lightning Talks with Nele, Paulo, Johan and Carl. Let me introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Abby. I work with the Aspiring Speakers and the other 15 plus communities, all of which are free and run by RecWorks. We are a tech recruitment company with a huge difference. So we're always on the lookout for more clients, obviously. Some of our best clients have come from community members who recommended RecWorks to their internal talent team. So if you are hiring for a new team or you're working for a company that is, please do let us know. If you want to know more about what we can offer, just ping me a message on Twitter, LinkedIn or Slack. My name is as you see it on the screen, and we really look forward to taking that further and working with you. So what's the difference, I hear you ask? Well, also as a company, we believe that recruitment really can be a force for good in the industry beyond just placing people in jobs. We have a particular focus in our communities on learning, mentoring and personal development. If people want to learn and others want to teach or share their knowledge, we are more than happy to connect you through our communities and events. We see this as giving back to those we've worked with in the past, but also paying it forward to those we hope to work with in some way in the future. To date, we have run hundreds of different events, and earlier this year, we made our 4,000th introduction through our Meet a Mentor community, which does what it says on the tin. You can be a mentee or a mentor. And again, that's completely free for all our members. As I've already said, we love to give opportunities for people to connect, and this event is part of that. If you'd like to know more about any of our communities, please do get in touch with myself, Barry Cranford or Helen Lewis, if you know either of them, and we can take it from there. The recording of today's session will be available for you on YouTube. I will put the link to the channel in the chat for you. And after each speaker, there will be an opportunity for a question or two. So if you think of anything while the talks are happening, please do make a little note, put it in the chat, unmute and ask when I open the floor for questions. This is a very free and easy informal session, so please do ask questions if any come up for you. With no further ado though, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker today, which is Nele. So over to you.
Hi, thanks. Let me share my screen. Okay. Maybe we'll use some of the Zoom stuff here. Cool. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for sharing your lunch break with me. I have a really exciting topic for you, and that are workflow engines. And I'm also going to explain how you can add glitter to a glue for microservice orchestration. My name is Nele Uhlemann, and I'm a developer advocate at Camunda. And you see me here with my second passion, and that's actually food. And if you see examples from me, you will always and often find food in them. You can find me on Mastodon and also on Twitter. Let's see how long Twitter lasts, but yeah, that's the best way to contact me. Let's talk about software and let's talk about architectures. If we talk about architectures nowadays, the way to go are microservices. And the idea to decompose the system into single services is not new. What is new is that those services are independent, deployable, and also horizontal scalable. And that often leads to restructuring organizations. So you often have now teams dedicated to one service, and those services also have an own database. And if we have that, it's already fine, but still we need to find a way how those services can communicate, because if they have an overall functionality in a system, they cannot be isolated. And the two approaches we have here to build this glue, so to stick those services together, is choreography on the one hand and orchestration on the other. That are the two most common glues that we can see in industry. If we talk about microservice choreography, we have a glue that is based on messages. So we often have message brokers in those architectures where services can send messages to and other services can subscribe to those messages. So once a topic becomes available for a server that has subscribed to a message, it can then perform the logic it is supposed to perform. And yeah, some common message brokers are Kafka and RabbitMQ, for example. The other way and the other glue that we can find in those architectures is orchestration. And when we talk about orchestration, we have a component that is the orchestrator or the workflow engine. And this whole approach is very command driven. So the orchestrator defines the run order of the services. And once work for a service is available, the service is subscribed to the orchestrator or to the workflow engine, and then also can perform the business logic it is assigned to. And for me, it's important that I don't think there is one or the other that is better. I think it all depends on your architecture and also on the functionality you want to build with it. And often we see from our customers that they use even both. So they have sometimes message brokers side by side with a workflow engine. But today, let's talk a little bit about the orchestration component, because that's also what I know best when it comes to those architectures. When we have a workflow engine, it defines the order of the services. And that can look basically like we have it here, that we have a sequence flow with an order of 3 services, and that's quite simple. First A, B, and then C. And by having this, we introduce also state management into our architecture or into our system. So we have a clear indication of which of the things that has happened already and the things that we still need to perform in a workflow. And also we have, by that way, we define a way to have a way of central error handling. So if something goes wrong, we directly see where something has happened, and then we can start debugging. And you can see already here, maybe for orchestration, where it gets quite handy is if our workflows become more complex. So if our overall functionality of a system is more complex, workflow engines can be very handy, and orchestration can be very handy to have the observability of your systems. Often I hear when I say workflow engines, "Oh, Nele, that's quite an old term. How can you combine workflow engines with microservices?" And that often leads to the assumption that workflow engines became quite famous in 2000 when we talked about service-oriented architectures. And of course, you cannot go and use one of those engines to orchestrate your microservices. It's like you cannot use your analog camera to produce digital pictures. But luckily, we see modern workflow engines in the market as well. And in the open source space, for example, you have Netflix that has a tool called Conductor that is open source, that it's used internally for microservice orchestration. And on the proprietary side, for example, you have AWS Step Functions that is doing something similar in the Amazon space. And it's important to remember which tool to use, and to use one of those that is really built for microservice orchestration. Let's talk about the glitter when it comes to orchestration, and then sometimes it can be really beneficial to look into the past as well, because also workflow engines in the past had struggled to define a language how to define workflows. And I discovered, for me, really what adds glitter to microservice orchestration is a powerful language. And the powerful language is, for me, BPMN. That's business process model and notation. And the language has 3 main things why I really like it. The first thing is that it is an open standard. So you have no vendor login when you define the workflows in that language. The second benefit is that you have a visual graphic of your workflow, but behind, in the background, you have an executable XML structure that makes it quite powerful. For example, Netflix Conductor is using a text-based approach with just YAML files, and that makes it again quite hard if you want to communicate your workflows with different stakeholders involved in software design. And the third thing that I like about BPMN is that it is quite rich. It's a very rich and powerful language that helps you to define state in your system and also can reduce some boilerplate code. And because of time today, I just have one glittercorn for you in that language feature. And I show you now a BPMN diagram. Again, it's very simple here. We have 3 tasks aligned to each other. So we have decide on restaurant, order food and eat food. And finally, we have a process that includes food. And what BPMN allows you to do is, by introducing that construct here in the bottom, you have a way to introduce global time handling. So that means basically basically, if the overall process above takes longer than 30 minutes, we do something instead. In our case, we order takeaway food, and then we end the process. And if you think now you want to introduce such a time or global time management in code, that is quite complex. It's not so easy. And that's one way how BPMN is really handy and helps you. But as I said, there are really more features. There is more glitter when it comes to BPMN. I hope in that short time I could give you an insight which different glues we have when it comes to microservices, why BPMN is such a glitter component, and also how the orchestration can help you to have the overview of your systems. I wanted to include code, but it was really short already, or the time is short. You find here a link to a GitHub repo where I have built a more complex process around Indian restaurants and how I would find one. And if you want to check it out also in code, please feel free. And if you have more questions, also find me on Twitter or find me on LinkedIn. I'm really happy to connect. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, we do have one in the chat. Let me just open that up. In your views, when do you use orchestration versus choreography, i.e. what types of use cases fit one versus the other?
So I think orchestration is quite handy once you have complex things to do and once you have a really complex workflow you want to implement, because if you then just use messages, you would slightly lose the overview of what's going on in your system. I think that's generally a really good idea when you want to use orchestration. And on the other hand, messaging can be useful if you have smaller logic and things just are really fluent, and the overall observability is not that important.
Okay, fantastic. And Alex, you've got a question. Go for it.
Yeah, sorry. Have I unmuted myself? Great. So I did a quick article on BPMN last year as I was trying to learn it, and I didn't actually realise that you could use it to generate this sort of code. So that's quite impressive. I was using it for things like data processing, so less like microservices. So do you have any tips or experience of using it outside of microservices?
Yes, sure. I think you're right. So it's known for a language that was introduced with business process management to define workflows in a business sense. But if you look at workflow engines like for microservice orchestration, and Camunda, I think, is one example that uses BPMN here. You can implement those service tasks in BPMN as microservices, and that's quite easy because it provides you client libraries, so you can really subscribe your microservices quite easily to the workflow engine. I think that might be a really good start if you look into microservice orchestration with BPMN, to look at the resources that Camunda provides here. I don't want to make any big advertisement, but I don't know any other company at the moment that also uses BPMN for microservice orchestration, at least.
Thanks very much.
Fab. And Peter, you had a question. Yes.
Excellent talk. It's probably the first one I've seen for ages that's actually mentioned BPMN. For me, my background is business analysis and consulting, and it's really good to see somebody talking to essentially a bunch of developers about BPMN, but it's always felt like a very dry subject to me, something I see the value of with consultancy, but something developers just turn their nose up at and say, well, you know, why are we doing this? So my question is, how would you sell the concept of BPMN to developers to make it as exciting as something like Docker or Kubernetes?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, because BPMN has history, and often developers know BPMN because maybe they worked in the past and they worked with systems that were proprietary and that had the strong vendor login, where it was not really nice to develop BPMN. You know, like it was hard to write your custom code to it. But if you look at all the benefits you have as a developer when you use BPMN with a tool that is open and that's open source, you really have to focus on the things that gives you. And it's like, I think the timer, to implement a timer is a good thing, but there are other things like BPMN errors and escalations and a lot of fun things that would take more effort to just produce in code than just using BPMN, and that makes it quite fun.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Oh, I'm so excited to hear about that, and really pleased to know that it's something people haven't necessarily heard about very much lately. So thank you so much for bringing that to us. Our next speaker today is Paulo. So over to you, Paulo.
Hi, hello everybody. I can see on Christmas spirit again. Always happy. Let's share my screen. Right, so I'm going to talk about Apache Kafka and what it is and where to use. That's the questions I'm trying to answer today, and based on my experience working on customers. So my name is Paulo Menon. I'm a principal app dev consultant at Red Hat, and I'm hands-on architect. So in my daily basis, I'm doing architect solutions, architect reviews, and also developing, implementing, and delivering those solutions. Solutions that we work using cloud platform, using message broker, message stream, Java, Python, in Spring Boot, Cloud Native, and all the methodologies, DevOps, Agile, CDI, and app modernization. We are also responsible to do workshops, demos, POC, pilots, and knowledge transfer to our customers. And as a volunteer work, I am STEM ambassador, doing talks about RT career and secondary schools, colleges, and universities. And then Meet a Mentor, which is another community organized by RecWorks. I'm a mentor there. And in the London Java community is also organized by RecWorks that I also involve. So then, if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter or the Meet a Mentor community. I'm more than happy to be your mentor. So let's try to fix some terminologies. Also, for me, sometimes I be confused. So Apache Kafka is the core engine, is the tool that you're going to install to create your topic message. And Kafka Streams is your Java API. So basically your jar file that you're going to add to your application to create the consumers and producers. And your Kafka connector is your extension. So you're going to add that to your Apache Kafka and make it easy to connect to other applications. So what is it? What is Apache Kafka first? Let's try to do one step back and explain what's Apache Kafka. So in simple terms, Apache Kafka is a decentralized event log system. So you need to think here in events. So it's not like your log system for your application. These events that happen that you need to log on Apache Kafka. And the producer are going to publish message onto topic. So they group message to topic and it's specific to disk. So it's all saved on the file system and it is not in memory. It's not the message going to can be flagged to stay there forever and only go away if you delete it. Your consumer can read old message and even retract from any point of this message. So that's the advantage between the difference, right, between message brokers and Apache Kafka. So the streaming saves that message on a log, and you can read from your consumer. You don't need to subscribe to a topic key, and you need to only read for the topic. You actually subscribe to any topics on Apache Kafka, and you can read old message and can retrieve from a time point from that log. So the Kafka Stream Java API, like I said, is a jar file that you add to your applications as a dependency. So if you're using Maven, that's the dependency you need to put there, the group ID, artifact ID and version, and you're gonna have your app API ready for you to use and create your consumer and producer. So that's the example of a code to a producer. So a simple code, you can find that on a Kafka quick start and explain how to use that. And if you want to use different tools, you don't need to be all using the API. In other customers, I use Apache Camel as a consumer. And in this specific scenario, the consumer is reading from a topic from a loan perspective, like is events happening where a loan is being approved to certain type of different regions and customers, and it's all driven by EGBPM workflow behind the scenes that create the producer and publish to Kafka. And here I read that message and send to InfluxDB, which is a time-based database. At that time, was the database we want to use and get that easy with Grafana. So the Kafka connector is a plugin to, so basically you have already your Kafka, then you connect to, you add Kafka connector, like say, for example, to a database, and that saves you the time that you don't need to write your consumer and your producer. So they basically start reading from one table, and events that happen on that table, like insert, delete, you define. So then gonna send to Kafka connector, and you log on Kafka, and also information from Kafka can be pushed and saved on your database. So where to use this? So you need to think in event-driven solutions, like we have like a chatbot that needs to order something behind the scenes. So loads of chatbots sailing in your store, gonna send in information to that Kafka, get saved into the log and triggering other things to happen behind the scenes. And you always can go back there and check the order, check the time, what the order happened. Also, like events that happen in different, like a platform, train platforms, that events are happening in different platforms, but you need to centralize and display this information in one display. So this is also a use case that is very popular use for both, also for both application and component integration. So integration like Java with mainframe or Java with .NET, and also very popular in microservice to make these different components in your microservice architecture to talk with each other, and then depose on the centralized log. And audit systems, like as explained in the database, or even your own application, they can all be published information that, and you can use the Kafka connector and be auditing these databases. Replacing the old ASB legacy system, like old systems used to have that glue everything together, and now you can use a message base and message stream, which is faster. IoT system as well, they can have, like, for example, a tram line electric system that has IoT system sending message to Kafka. Then when you have like one of these power lines fail, you can easily check on Kafka. Then you can inform your other systems, oh, here's a failure on the power line of that tram. Then they go there and fix it. So I'm trying to do an overview of some of the scenarios that you'd be using Kafka. Is also easy, like, to say when not use Kafka. Like if you have a customer that you want to put a memory queue. So if you want a memory queue, a temporary queue, because that this message doesn't matter for you, then you go to a message broker that has this type of features. So I hope you like my talk today. I have more to cover, but we have short of time. So thank you all. That's because last time you guys put a cat and dog. So.
I was going to ask, yeah, last time we had loads of everybody's slideshow had a cat in it.
Yeah, so I say, oh, I'm going to put a dog. And that's actually my dog, so he's my
gorgeous
little puppy. He always sleeps here close to me. So.
Oh, bless. Oh, lovely. Does anybody have any questions for Paulo? Yep, go for it, Peter.
First of all, thank you for putting a dog in the presentation. I think I was one of the people last time who put a cat in, and then Carly put another cat in as well, so it's appreciated. I've only really ever used Kafka or seen it used in high availability environments where there are multiple servers. Would you recommend it as being suitable for single server deployments?
Yes, it's suitable for single server deployments. It's not a size that you not fix it to a size. Like if it's distributed, is big, is enterprise, or is a small application, is well fit to any of these scenarios. You just need to think of what you want to solve with Kafka, right? Some of the scenarios might be solved easily with a message broker. So you just need to have the right tool to the right job, but the size is always it's not really a big thing.
Perfect, thank you.
And Alex, you've got a question for us.
Yeah, it's two quick questions. So did I hear that you said you use BPMN in the background to help design your data flows?
Yeah, on that particular scenario, I used the BPM, the JBoss Business Manager Process,
Cool.
which was one of the tools. So they have a node like Kamuda was explained. They have business process. In Red Hat, we have business process as well. And one of the business process builds a node with a configurable way to publish message to a Kafka.
I got my point across.
Yeah.
You didn't have to use microservices.
Yeah, you don't. You can use your BPM process and using the cloud. You can deploy on the cloud.
Cool. If it's okay, the second half of my question was, are you aware of? I mean, you're not a company selling Kafka, so
No.
are you aware of things like Red Panda, which is an alternative to Kafka, but is API compatible?
No, not really. I'm not aware of
Cool.
that. I've been heavily using Kafka in several customers. And I always point people to go to the community version of Kafka. Is the Kafka a quick start?
You mean your
amazing.
employers don't sell a support contract? I don't believe you.
Yeah, no, they sell.
I bet they do sell a support contract.
They sell. They have an enterprise product behind that. IBM has as well. All the other big vendors has. And it's just like for customers to have the first experience and they can evaluate it whatever they needed for their business, right?
That's the wonders of open source. So,
yeah. I always
like
honest. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm tech guy. If you want to evaluate Camunda and evaluate with Kafka is also good. And if you evaluate with other vendors of tools, it's up to the customer to decide what's best to fit on the
absolutely.
solution.
Because there's balances, and sometimes you want to spend more money on tools. It makes you more efficient later on. Sometimes you don't want to spend the money on tools, and it takes more time.
Exactly.
But yeah.
It also goes to what your team has knowledge of.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So, thank you very much. It was a great talk.
Excellent, thank you. And Andy's got a question. Go for it.
Hi there. Hi. Thanks for the talk, Paulo. Yeah, just wondering how you would make a decision on using something like ActiveMQ versus Kafka. What sort of considerations you'd take into account?
Yeah, you need to consider that Kafka Streams is persisting on a log, so they are high throughput, so the I/O is higher, right? And then if you have scenarios that you need just like temporary queues that you're just going to put objects on the memory, and so you don't need to persist that, so you would go to ActiveMQ, like a message broker, a traditional message broker. So if you don't, let's say, for example, if you want your consumers be subscribed to a specific topic and only react to that topic, and then when the message goes away from that message, from the queue, you can't read again. So this is another scenario that you would consider ActiveMQ. One of the classic like implementation people like to do is like a retry mechanism using queues. So they read from the queue and put a timer to expire the message on that queue, and then read from the queue, and then need to do some enrichment on this message and save in the database and call some web service and other applications. And then if they fail, they go there and read it again, the message from the queue, and retry everything again. So then when they expire, they try again to read from the queue, and the message is not there anymore. With Kafka, you can't do that because it's always be there, right? So the message is there, is physically there, is saved on the file system. And for that reason also, you need to consider your storage. If you don't build an enterprise storage thinking on how you're going to handle the size of this file, you can have performance problems.
Cool.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you. And we have one final question from Nuno before we'll go on to our next speaker. So over to you.
Hello, everyone. Not really a question. It's more like in types of considerations that you do when you decide a system like ActiveMQ or RabbitMQ versus Kafka. I think one big consideration is scalability, resiliency. The other consideration that you need to think about is the the access to the ecosystem of tools. So with Apache Kafka, you've got things like Kafka Connect, source connectors, sync connectors. You've got, as you mentioned, Paulo, Kafka Streams, which is a higher level of abstraction over the consumer and publisher API of Kafka. You do have technologies that have first-class support for stream processing. When I mean stream processing is doing things like filtering, joining, aggregations, mapping as first-class citizens. So all of that is kind of, those are factors that you should consider when choosing a messaging solution or platform.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely, spot on. Yes, so my presentation was short, so I need to cover
Yeah.
some of the things, not everything, but you're right. You're absolutely right. And you also, like, when we use Kafka, we deploying on cloud, we use stream Z operators, and DMZ also has some of the connectors that you can install easily using the operator, and also make Mirror Maker that can do recovery scenarios and replicate the whole Kafka to another data center. So there's a lot of features that is allowed you to be more flexible using a Kafka Streams. Yeah.
There's a very interesting question from Alex, I think, on Red Panda. I've been doing quite a deep evaluation of Red Panda. I think I'll suggest that topic, Abby, for a next, maybe not so much a lightning talk, but a longer talk.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool.
Send me your thoughts and I'll get you connected with Jade and she can get that organized. That would be great.
Yeah, sure.
Just quickly, Philip, you wanted to add something. Go for it.
Thanks very much. Hi, Paulo. I was just going to ask about Kafka Connect and how easy it is to make custom connectors.
Right, to customize, create your own connector, right?
Yeah, I know there's a lot available. I'm just wondering, is it easy to build your own connectors?
Well, if you, it's all based in Java, right? So you write a Java application, you can get a archetype from your connector and start building from there, or you can build from scratch. And it is a little bit of challenge to customize, but we have a community. If you look for the DMZ, where they create some of the Kafka connectors, like Kafka connector for Postgres or Kafka connector for different databases, and Kafka connector to Camel as well. And so you can implement that and create your own, and then starting sharing your findings, and people would be willing to help.
Cool. So yeah, if there's an archetype, then that does make it very easy.
Yeah, you do have to adhere to a set of APIs to develop your Kafka connectors. They are different, whether you do sync connector or source connected, but yes, it's possible. I wouldn't say it's extremely easy. There are a number of considerations that you need to have when doing it, especially when you consider it for high throughput scenarios, but it's entirely possible to do so. And in fact, I know there's a number of community projects doing that, as Paulo mentioned. So
Thanks very much.
Excellent, thank you. I'm loving all the discussion that's coming after these talks. It's brilliant. Thank you so much. But with no further ado, I would love to hand over to Johan for his talk. So over to you.
Hello, thank you. Let's see if I manage to share my desktop. So yeah, I'm Johan, and I will talk about coding heuristics. What I mean with coding heuristics is more habits that I have picked up and made a investigation in on why I do it. So the next time I will do it, I don't really need to think, and found it a bit that it speeds up my coding a bit and makes the coding more consistent. And one of the things that we know is that naming is really hard in programming. It's one of the hard problems. So some of these things, heuristics, is about naming. For example, I try to always use the name result of the variable that I will return from a function or method. It's a good habit for me, because when I read the code later and I see that something is called result, I know that this is what will be returned later, and I can concentrate on that value to see how the return value changes, but depending on the flow in the code. And this is a simple example that you declare result up in somewhere and it gets some values, it can change later on, and then in the end you have the return result. Another one is that I try to have plurals for collections, since a collection is more than one of something. And instead of using a singular word for it, since it represents multiple things, it should normally be a plural. So, for example, if I have an application that needs to handle books, and I have a list of books that contains book objects, I will call that books, just to make it consistent. And then when I see a word that is plural in the code, I will know that this is probably a collection of some kind, without really needing to see the declaration and where it's initialized. But there is always an exception to all things. So if you have a specific word for a collection, for example, in the domain that you're working in, I prefer to use that instead. So going back to the same example with the books, if it's more representing a library, because a library is actually a collection of books, or could be, then I would just use library instead, if it makes sense in my application and the domain that I'm working on in. And if we look at an object-oriented language, I try to get the higher up in the hierarchy that have things, I try to use simpler names, so more generic names. And for interfaces, they are probably, most often they are on the top level in some way. So I try to use a simple name there. For example, a book storage. For me, that means that anything that implements this interface will store books. It will contain books. And then you have a more specific name for the class that implements the interface. When I say interface here, it could also be an abstract superclass or a superclass of any kind. But what I try to do is say, what is this specific type of subclass or subtype of the interface? Why should what's so specific with that? So one could actually be if it's stored in the database, and it could be a DB book storage or a SQL book storage or something like that, and it actually implements the interface. So then when I look at the code, I know this one is using SQL, other things can use other things. Another thing is events in an application. I prefer to use them in the past tense because you emit an event normally after something happened. You don't emit it before something happened. So I try to use that in the words. So if I see a method or something in past tense, I can understand that it's an event or something that happened in the application, and I have some additional default understanding of what's happened or what thing it is just based on the name. So could be a book ordered or book shipped. For example, when I have shipped a book, I emit the event, not before I shipped it. So that's was the naming part that I had, and other things are inside methods. So I want to validate the input as early as possible, preferably if I need to do it. If I don't know that it's already validated, I try to put it in the beginning. So, for example, this one, I validate that we have it's not null. I couldn't come up with a better example. But yeah, so if it's null, I just return an empty list, which comes into another thing, which is using objects instead of null. So if you can replace a null value with some kind of instance, I try to use that as well. I also like to have clear decisions. What I mean with that is probably easier. It's a lot of text here, but that you have a clear decision. So you have an if statement and a clear criteria on why, when that's true. And then you have very, very little code inside that if statement. So in this case, I just call out to another method rather than having the code there. And this makes it very clear for me to see that what are the decisions that I make in this method. And then I can dig deeper into each individual method to understand what they actually do. Very related to that is the private helper methods. So I often use small methods just to be able to make my methods very clear, at least in my head, on what they are doing. And one way to think about it is that you should try to have the same level of abstraction inside the method. So here, if you look at this code, everything is actually a method that you call out to. It would be slightly different if the if statements had a lot of detailed logic in them to actually decide which level they should go into. But and that makes it hard for me to understand this. I also like to declare things close to where they are used, and especially that comes into values inside the method. So if I need to use the price on the book, I try to declare it. For me, it can be declared anywhere in the method, but I want to have it close to where it's being used rather than having it everything in the beginning of the method. There are a bit of exceptions to that rule. If I need to have manual memory management, for example, I like to have all of the things that I need to free in the end of the method in the beginning. So I have them together, and then I have a mirrored symmetry in the end of the method to actually free them up. But that's not that common nowadays. And that's it. That's some of the things that I have. I have a much bigger list than that. And I think the first time I came across these way of thinking was from an old book called Smalltalk Best Practices. There is a slightly newer version of that called Implementation Patterns, which is both good, and they explain much better than me on these small levels. But it made me think and understand what is it that I have for default behavior when I code, and why do I have that? And then also to, when you work in a team, to try to align on these default behaviors, because if we all have them, it will be much easier to have a consistent code base with everyone. And that's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Johan. I'm finding all of these talks fascinating. Nuno is holding up another recommendation as well. Clean code is another source that you can look at. Does anybody have any questions for Johan?
By the way, I just want to mention one thing before. I think this falls a lot into design patterns as well. It's just a slightly different name because I think it's slightly lower level and not as rigid in a way as design patterns are.
Cool. Any questions? I will take that as a no. If you think of anything, obviously you can see Johan's contact details there. Please do feel free to get in touch and you can ask him anything yourself, I'm sure. But with no further ado, then our final speaker for today is Carl. Over to you. You're still muted, Carl. Sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Sorry. So there's a lawnmower going on outside. Trying to spare you the background noise from that. I'd like to prefix my talk by saying this is very much my own opinion. Your mileage may vary. You might have different views on some of the points that I bring up, and that's fine. I think that the discussion is still worthwhile anyway, even if you might not come to the same conclusions that I have. Okay, let's try sharing the screen. Keynote. Can you see the first slide? Start the slideshow.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
We can see your first slide, yeah.
Nice. The politics and pitfalls of conference speaking. I'm going to go quite quickly on this because I've got quite a few slides and not a lot of time. Okay. The end goal, this collection of people, sort of aspiring speakers, the assumption is that the goal is to do some speaking and maybe a conference. Some points to consider though with the big conferences. Most big conferences are businesses and they're for profit. They have a priority that they need to sell tickets. In order to incite people to buy tickets, they want to have people on their program that incite people to want to pay often maybe hundreds of pounds to or dollars or whatever to attend the conferences. If they're not successful in selling tickets, margin of error may be that they could be hurt quite significantly financially if the conference doesn't sell well. This has kind of promoted a culture of conferences typically playing it safe and going with proven speakers that are known to be popular because they know that those will sell tickets. There's talk of need for new speakers, but my experience is I see conference after a conference where it's often the same usual suspects that you see at most conferences. So there's talk about it, not always seeing it put into action. So getting selected, what sells conference tickets? So if someone's already a popular speaker, you know, they're proven that'll sell tickets. If speaker might be unknown, but they represent a company that's a big name and popular and attractive, like one of the big IT companies it's prestigious, that's good at selling tickets. The speaker might already have a significant following online, you know, through blogging or social media and so on, even if they haven't as yet spoken at a conference, and it may be that speaking would be the next step for them after already having a following. Proposing a topic that's very topical and trendy at the moment. I feel like things like microservices have been very popular for a number of years, but choosing something that has very wide and broad market interest is also attractive. For the audience, they've got to turn around and usually get their company to pay for a ticket, and the company is going to ask them about what value they're going to get out of it, the things that they will learn, how is this going to benefit the business. So having speakers and talks that help justify getting something expensed is helpful, particularly if they can justify it's relevant to their job. I think in reality, a lot of people like to go to conferences to get some stuff that's of personal interest that might not be connected with their day job, and sometimes they also like the entertainment value, but they're probably not going to mention that bit to accounting. So established speakers, I don't know who this guy is, I just wanted to picture, but he's a speaker. A lot of the established speakers are brand ambassadors and evangelists. They work with the marketing departments of their company, and speaking at conferences is actually part of their job. This leads to them having this full support of the company behind them. They have all the resources, they're able to work on their presentation within work time because it's part of their job. They'll get their expenses to attend conferences if they get selected, again, because it's part of their job. Sometimes, especially for some of the big and wealthier companies, the conference may be sponsored by one of these companies, which would be helpful to them to get maybe some preferential treatment. I don't know what the rules are for all the conferences. I'm just speaking conferences in general, but if you've got a big conference that just happens to be sponsored heavily by a certain company, I think they're probably more amenable to let ambassadors from that company speak at the conference. Another way to get to speak at a conference is to be a person of note. You know, have you created a programming language? Have you created a library or a framework? Have you authored a book? Have you made a successful app? Have you launched a successful website? Have you founded a successful company? I prefix successful because some of these things it's possible to do and then be a complete flop. It's probably not going to stand you in good stead with a conference. Something that you've launched that has been popular and successful. The pitfalls with the big conference, the reality is honestly not always that great. You've got a lot of ambassadors from the big technology companies. I mean, I don't know how many people may have had the experience where they've had a presentation at a conference which feels suspiciously like it may be a sales or marketing pitch or an update on a certain version of a product that they are promoting. So you can feel a bit like you're being casually sold to or encouraged to use a certain product. What happens to be trendy for the mass market might not actually happen to be particularly interesting to you. So, you know, they're catering to what most people are interested in. That doesn't necessarily assume that everyone at the conference is going to be interested in that. And for some of the biggest and most popular conferences, the selection process has become so competitive that I've heard even the established speakers who are quite popular mentioning that they're struggling to get selected, even though they're a popular and established speaker. Alternatives to the big conferences. I may have stolen something here. Unconferences. Now,
I recognise that graphic.
London has an unconference. It's not the only unconference that exists. I'll also shout out that Coherence do a code retreat thing. Before the plague times, DevOps had Unvoxed, where they were stepping their toes in on conferences. It's self-managed, informal, so you don't have to go through all this rigorous speaker selection process or have all the prestige. It's accessible to new speakers. You may have more interesting conversations. Circling back to the whole thing about the big conferences pushing to the mass market, if you have quite niche interests, you may have more success finding people to discuss that with at an unconference where there isn't the pressure of trying to appeal to the mass market. Should be known sales and marketing pictures. Usually if people are caught doing that, it gets shot down. So that's not what unconferences are about. It's a relaxed and informal environment. And I'd like to, sometimes it's marketed that unconferences are like a stepping stone to get some practice in before managing to speak at a big conference, but I'd like to push the idea that unconferences are an end in of themselves, that even if you speak just at an unconference, that's still a worthwhile thing. I think, you know, part of my frustration with the big conferences is that such a tiny number of people actually get the opportunity to speak at them. I'd much rather see a broader participation. There's some other thoughts. I think this presentation was originally going to be a bit more ranty than it's turned out to be. I think a whole bunch of this other stuff will be probably going to another presentation, but the roles, thinking about the roles of things like rock stars and champions, and I personally, and this is just my view, I'd like to hear more from some of the groupies and the sidekicks and the minions and the underlings. They're not always wanting to see the rock stars who may not actually have a very typical experience of what it's like to be in an industry. If you're a very big name person in the industry, then I imagine that your experience is probably going to be a lot easier, especially when it comes to jobs, getting to do exactly what you want, than someone who's a more average member of the community. So their perspective might not necessarily resonate with your own experiences. This kind of idea of community being, sorry Labour Party, I'm not actually a member, but I still, for the many but the few, I don't know if they've got that patented, but I've pinched it. But the idea about community instead of a small group of people being put on a very high pedestal. Questions about how beneficial are the traditional conferences to the community. I think that's something that could be worth discussing, and that's it. I think I've shot through that one to not take a lot of time. I could say at the end that from my own experience, I've tried applying to the big conferences, been rejected every single time. Going back to all the points of things how to be noteworthy in the community, I don't know if I tick any of those boxes, which is a good reason why I don't get selected, just that I'm not an established speaker, haven't written a book or any of those things. And I have been encouraged by sort of people on selection committees to do things like blogging, or maybe start with smaller things like lightning talks or smaller sessions and things like that. But I reached a certain point where I just got a bit tired of trying to justify myself to the big conferences and said, you know what, it isn't that important to me to speak at a big conference, especially not to want to restructure my life around being a more appealing candidate. So, you know, if I just stick to like smaller events and things like that, I'm quite happy to do that, because I think for someone like a brand ambassador, that's their job. They need to get out there, they need to promote. But as this isn't for me, it's hard to justify why you'd go so far out of your way to get accepted when is it hugely beneficial? I mean, you know, there's the dream of, you know, traveling the world and getting it all expensed, but you know, I can live without it. I get by. I don't do so badly for myself. So that's it. I hope it wasn't too ranty. Are there any questions at this point, or is it just going to be stunned silence?
Hey, no, I just want to say, first of all, great talk, very honest, and think really up to the point to this specific crowd over here. About 2 years ago, we had Hadi Hariri from JetBrains giving a talk. And it's funny because now he's a very known speaker. He's on lots of conferences all over the place. And he said that he started exactly with this kind of frustration that you had. But he made it like kind of a full-time job. Not that he doesn't do other things, but he's an evangelist. I don't know if this is the proper question for you or not, but of the conference that you've been to, do you think that folks that just want to give a technical talk, they don't want to become like you said, full-time evangelists answering to market? Is there still a way to reach like Keyquan or DevOps or one of those big companies as just a tech guy, or you really need the support?
I think that's really a question for them, to be honest. I can only give my opinion, but at the end of the day, I'm not in any way involved in the selection process. Sometimes I have a little bit of frustration in that I know that the London Java community particularly supports DevOps, but I'm a little bit cynical about it. It's like, you know, this conference is for profit. It's not a charity. You know, you give time and helpful because, you know, we're a community who like being helpful, but we're not necessarily obliged to help someone in their for-profit endeavor. But if they're making the decision that they're making it so hard for new speakers, you know, I guess it's for them to answer that. I can't change it. I think for me, it's just so much more easier to be on the sidelines complaining than it is to get selected. So I've opted for just complain about it endlessly, which I think is then turned conferences against me as well. So I think I'm making like less and less likelihood of getting selected. So stick to maybe the on conference instead.
You never know. Oh, sorry, Anthony.
Yeah,
You
well,
never
you
know. You might
maybe I'm going to write
you
an
might
app
get
and it's-
selected because you keep complaining about it. You never
if
know.
I
It's
ever-
something that gets you
maybe
noticed, isn't it?
if I ever get this Von Trapp Family Pies education project finished that keeps going on the back burner, so look, I have an app. Let me speak about it. I can make a bunch of devices sing. Just yeah, that's the dream. I have to actually finish it. You know, dreaming about it's easy. Finishing it's another matter.
Yeah. Alex, you had something you wanted to add. Go for it.
Yeah, hi Carl. Thanks very much for the talk. Very interesting. I had a bit of question about how unconferences work in selecting speakers, selecting talks, and having people know that those talks are happening. So I'm from reasonably, I mean, I used to run a user group, so I'm familiar with the difficulties of trying to find a speaker who wanted to give a talk for nothing. And yes, quite often that was a tiny bit of a sales pitch for their particular company. But also I am used to certain types of book conventions where some time is spent trying to select speakers and trying to select topics for those speakers that work well together, but they can be told, people, the conference attendees can be told about it in advance. So can you enlighten me about how that works in an unconference?
All the unconferences that I've attended have worked along the same lines, that people write down their idea of a session on a sticky note and it gets stuck up on a board, and there's like a time slot calendar that there's a number of time slots, a number of rooms, and the organizers will get the sticky notes and allocate them into rooms. If it happens to be an overlap, like two sticky notes are essentially the same subject, they'll put them together, but it's kind of organized as they go along, and people will just turn up to whichever session they are interested in, but nothing is organized ahead of time. That's quite a thing for a conference, that you actually have no idea what's going to get spoken about until you turn up on the day.
That is interesting. So if I could just check that I've understood, there is a certain amount of organization, but it's just in time organization.
Just in time organization.
On the day.
Sticky notes on a
who's wanting
calendar or a time
so I
slot.
suppose that the next level would be people sort of like ticking the sticky note saying, I'd love to see that, I'd love to see that, or just the organizers kind of say, yeah, that sounds
I think
good.
technology could help. I mean, if they had a platform which ahead of time could take some ideas that are things that people would be interested in, submit them ahead of time so you can think about them. It's like, start some discussion ahead of the unconference. I don't see why not. I haven't seen that actually done, but it's certainly possible.
Cool. I've learned stuff today. Thank you very much.
And Paulo, go for it.
Hi, Carl. Great presentation. Really enjoy. It was honest opinion. And so my question is, so in your opinion, so you are having impression that you give up to apply for this big conference, or you still have plans to apply in the future?
It was just making me unhappy. You know, we put the time in, he gets submitted thinking, I don't know how to make this presentation any more appealing than I could possibly can, and it'd still get rejected. And I'm just thinking, clearly don't have a problem with a shortage of speakers. I feel like I'm trying to fix a problem that isn't there by submitting to conferences that are already heavily oversubscribed. So I'm not saying that everyone should do this. I'm just saying, for me personally, it just wasn't important enough for me to continue with it when it didn't seem like I was getting anywhere, especially considering they're not the only opportunity to speak and do a presentation like I'm doing right now.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Excellent. Any more questions for Carl before I wrap us up?
I might give my little observation, which I just slapped into the chat, which is another option. I think nobody's mentioned is actually doing your own YouTube videos, so that you say, you've got your hour talk or something like that, and do it that way. Not sure that's necessarily the best thing for everybody, but it's an option.
I guess platforms like Pluralsight and Udemy have even formalized that further into having a platform where you can not only deliver a talk, but entire courses that you can put together, and the barrier to entry is quite low, but it's still quite time consuming to put together, but certainly yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So all that is left for me to say today then is thank you so much to Nele, Paulo, Johan and Carl for speaking to us and sharing some of what you know and think. It's been great to hear from you all. Thank you everybody else for coming and joining us. As Carl has already done, there is a little plug there for the LJC conference that's on the 5th of December. So if you want to come along and join us there, you're more than welcome. And if you've been listening to these talks and watching them and going, oh, I'd really love to do this, but I've no idea where to start, fear not. As part of our aspiring speakers community, we do run workshops on how to write a short talk from scratch in 15 minutes, and we give you a template throughout the session that you can then use to build your talk. I know Paulo has asked for that as well. Hi, Pup. And so we are working on getting it to you, Paulo. I haven't forgotten. But if you'd like to come to any of our workshops, or like I said in my intro, if you want to know about any of our other communities, please do get in touch with me, and I can link you up with the right place, the right community, etc. And we would love to see you. But for now, this is actually our last lightning talk session before Christmas, and we'll be back in the new year. So thank you so much, everybody who's been joining us over the last year. I hope you have a great Christmas and New Year, even though it's a month away, but you know, have a great Christmas and New Year and a great rest of your afternoon, and we will see you in 2023. Have a great rest of your year. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Take care.
See some
Bye.
of you
Thank
on
you.
conference and some in 2023.
Fantastic. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.